Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of our listeners and all of our viewers. We have to thank you all profusely for your support of Rethinking Freedom, which some of you listen to, of course, on KVBM and also on KRGN, but also for those of you who are downloading our podcast, Rethinking Freedom, and also watching on our YouTube channel. I think we're over 4,000 subscribers right now. We're really looking forward to continuing to grow because this is not just a show. It is about rethinking our freedom and how each and every one of us shows up daily to maintain our freedom, because freedom is not free. And I think for this generation, we are seeing that manifest in ways that we hadn't before. We can certainly read about things historically that have happened in the United States of America and across the globe that have infringed on people's freedoms, our right to live fully as human beings, to take care of everyone in our community. But I think this is the first time for many of us that if we're paying attention, we might be seeing it happening in real time. I am so grateful for the guest that we have on our show today. It's really early where he is on the West Coast, but he is making the time to be with us. He is a gentleman who has been all over the airwaves on Democracy Now! And many other media forums have given him an opportunity to share the story that you're going to hear now. Think about what you can be doing in your own way, in your community, and also understanding that we have to organize because individuals do not beat institutions. Today with us, we have Raphael Garcia. I gotta tell this story, Raphael, when we first met. I don't know if you remember this.
Mm-hmm.
We first met at the Youth Backyard Gardening Initiative in Killeen, Texas, that is headed up by Rhonda Brown. And it's just a group of us who come together and try to grow things and to feed people. And that particular Saturday morning, Raphael was out there. We're cutting down stuff and cleaning up the garden and cleaning up the area and making sure the fence is okay so that all the animals that don't necessarily need to be in the garden are in there. And I was just so impressed by you, impressed by your commitment to community, impressed by the way that you volunteer and show up. You could be living just a good life and just enjoying yourself, but the way that you understand that we are part of a larger community. So let me read the official bio. Raphael Garcia is a servant leader for sure, a strategic thinker and an advocate for community development with over 11 years of leadership and management experience. He's a U.S. Army veteran. Thank you so much for your service and sacrifice. A former Army engineer officer and former management analyst for the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. He also currently serves as a planning commissioner and community advisory board member for the City of Olympia. He has an academic background in geological engineering, an MS at Missouri University of Science and Technology, and he got his Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from the Maryville University of St. Louis. And he's a full-time MBA student at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business. He specializes in data-driven decision-making, policy compliance, and strategic program development. He is, and I can attest to this, passionate about equity and sustainability. I told you how we met. We were trying to get food out of the land, right?
Sure.
He has collaborated with over 60 nonprofit organizations as he seeks to continue to drive impactful community initiatives nationwide. Raphael Garcia, welcome to Rethinking Freedom.
Thank you for having me.
Well, gosh, there's so much we can cover. We only have, like 55 minutes here or so. So tell me, what has been happening lately and why do our listeners need to know this?
Yes. So, as we all know, there's the Department of Government Efficiency that's come into play. And then with that, there's been major changes with the federal government in terms of them reducing the workforce. This is across different sectors of the government. For me personally, on behalf of my work with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, I was terminated on February 13th. And then that plays into the bigger picture of, because there's thousands of others just like me that were terminated under wrongful considerations, to kind of expand upon that termination. So despite me having like an outstanding performance evaluation for my supervisors, they submitted an exemption reconsideration request on my behalf. I was abruptly terminated. This was after hours on February 13th, and it was via email. The official explanation of the termination essentially cited that based on my performance, that you have not demonstrated that your further employment in the agency would be in the public interest. But really, there was no evidence of any deficiencies or prior counselings. I would rather have them had been more transparent and open about, hey, we're making budget cuts. But based on their sightings, there's that legal framework of all these terminations that are happening, because a lot of us some of us were promoted. Like for me, I was pending a promotion, but they cited all of us under performance-based reasons. So that's where it's troubling. And then a lot of it happens so suddenly, when strategically there's supposed to be a process, reduction in force process within the federal government. There's step processes of reducing the workforce capacity, but they didn't do that. It was just immediate cutoff of all these employees. You recognize too, some of these employees were like working on nuclear cleanup sites. Some were safeguarding our nuclear arsenal. So there's very drastic cuts, especially you have like the bird flu going on, the measles outbreak happening in the South. There's cuts to the CDC all across every sector of the federal government. They're making these cuts, and they seem to be targeting the newly hired personnel, when the issue there is these positions were listed for hiring because there was a need, or they needed that backfill for staffing. So that's the essential scope of what's been going on in the federal government in terms of the workforce.
And tell us a little bit about the work that you were doing prior to this, what I would consider wrongful termination. And we'll talk a little bit more about the politics behind what's going on. But please tell us a little bit more about what you and your colleagues were doing.
Yes. So I served as the only management analyst at the Seattle Regional Office's Disability Rating Activity Site. So in simple terms, what this meant, I was doing more so this multifaceted work of two people, because there was two jobs that I had to take on because we're already short-staffed. So my job was to ensure that every United States Army disability benefits claim was processed accurately and efficiently. And then our target population specifically was for all Army active duty, reserve, and National Guard service members being medically separated from service due to major health concerns and conditions or illnesses. As complex and technical as all that was, I essentially made sure that our system ran operationally to optimize the customer experience so that these veterans and their families received their benefits without those unnecessary delays. And then, kind of furthermore, to expand on that, my job directly impacted the timeliness of all these Army soldiers going through the medical evaluation board. I oversaw every single Army claim across those different sectors. And then the bigger implications of my job as well is the slower our processing for our division, the longer it would take to medically separate these injured soldiers, which delays critical backfills on the military side, directly affecting the force readiness and national defense part to the military as well. So it wasn't just the VA side of things. There's also the Department of Defense side of it as well. And then our division, so in the Seattle regional office, we have multiple divisions, but our division was specifically comprised of about just over 170 personnel, when in actuality, we were actually supposed to have 200 personnel in total. So we were already understaffed, and many of us were covering down for jobs. We're pulling overtime that's uncompensated. There's some employees that do get paid overtime, but they're the ones directly rating the claims and processing it from actually having to read through the details of these claims. But that's essentially the scope of my roles and kind of how it ties into the division. I have a lot more detailed nuance of operations that I handled, but that's the basic understanding of it.
So for our listeners here in Central Texas, because we have the largest Army base in the United States, population-wise, Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, I think that many of our listeners can absolutely understand what you're saying. And hopefully, for those of you who are not in any way involved with the military, understanding what happens with our patriots when they get injured in service to us, I think this is a great education for you. So when you talk about processing their claims and their benefits, what happens? I mean, because I think sometimes we need to like break this down for people to really understand. We're not just using words. Let's talk about the implications. So what happens to someone serving us in the Army who is now hurt, is dealing with whether it's physical or mental health issues that prevent them from being able to do the job? What happens to them in this process of filing claims and then hoping for disabilities and then finding out that there are delays they have no control over? How does that impact that soldier's life and the lives of that soldier's loved ones?
Yes. So to kind of give a little bit of a historical context to it. So before our division, which has that special mission of handling these types of claims, before we actually existed, there was the process of the service member having to go through, it's called the Integrated Disability Evaluation System. And then each branch of the military has this specific type of system to get through the medical evaluation board. So essentially, the service member, upon serious surgery, injury, or like debilitating illness, like they got cancer or some sort of, those are just examples. They essentially work with the medical personnel within that certain branch of service, for us, the Army, and then they get evaluated throughout that process. So historically, they would get evaluated through the process, and then if determined unfit based on those medical evaluations, then the claims process would start after that. But what has changed over time to expedite ensuring the service member gets taken care of, especially by the time they are medically separated or retired from service, we do it in parallel with the medical evaluation board process. So that way, by the time they get out, as close as to that time frame, their disability benefits come through. That way, they're tied directly with the VA, getting the medical care they need, and then the compensation to help them navigate civilian life, especially because now with their limitations, that drastically affects their ability to work in different aspects, especially to what they were doing, or their ability to pursue training or certain types of educations that could further better suit a career on the civilian side that could tailor towards their specific disabilities. So that's kind of what the process looks like. And then now, with those changes, we shoot for that goal of having these claims ready by 15 average days of completion by the time they separate. So within that 15-day period, they should be getting their disability benefits established and care with the VA established. But in certain cases, especially with increasing inventory of these claims coming through and the amount of soldiers that are getting hurt or seriously injured, this has grown, and then the inventory keeps coming in on these claims. And I've seen trends where this average days to complete on the back end is passing slightly above that 15-day threshold. And it's important to know that we aren't at our full capacity of the work personnel that we need to keep up with our ideal goal of those 15 average days to complete these claims.
So when the servicemen and women do not get their claims processed in the way that even the government has indicated that they would like to, and of course the service people would love it to be even more effective, what happens to their benefits and their ability to take care of themselves?
It's definitely drastically, like, because especially on the compensation side, not having those benefits right off the bat from separating, that kind of puts that financial burden, because once they're kind of like out of the service, they don't necessarily have all the benefits that were while they were in service, all that active duty or National Guard, Reserve, whatever compensation they were getting for salary wise, that's not fully to its full capacity. In a lot of the cases, a lot of these service members, they have families to take care of. You need to think about their children, ensuring they're taken care of, especially from a health coverage wise basis, because then their families get taken care of as well, because they are no longer able to fully serve. So that's kind of the challenges. And then kind of, I guess, speaking from my own personal experience, when I separated from the Army in the late spring of 2024, my benefits claims for a lot of my disabilities were actually delayed several few months. So for me personally, I went through a different processing thing with the VA, which was benefits delivery at discharge system, which ideally I would have had my benefits processed by the time I got out in that spring time frame, but it ended up carrying over into the summer of 2024. And the issue with it carrying over further was I actually wasn't able to get VA healthcare to handle a lot of the injuries or disabilities that I incurred during service. Heck, I had a major surgery during service that had issues that followed on from there. So it's that delay in healthcare, especially because really the only healthcare I was able to get from the VA while this was happening was behavioral health. And then even with that, there was delays in that healthcare processing as well. So like to get an appointment, it would take a little bit. And then from there too, because I didn't have that benefits established, by the time I got out, it took a while for me to get the specialty care like orthopedics and all these physical therapy, all these different providers to really start taking care of all these injuries I occurred during active duty for me.
So I know we're going to continue to talk about the technical part, but for me, it's really important to drill down to how does this emotionally then affect the service member? So you're not just serving in this role, you've actually experienced this yourself. How did it feel knowing that as a young man, you committed yourself to serving the United States of America, to putting your body, your whole body in harm's way for the benefit of all of us, and then to endure these challenges, these injuries, and then on the back end still having to kind of struggle and fight with your own government to get the care that you deserve. How did that feel on an emotional level for you?
It was definitely mentally taxing. Personally, like mentally, I went through a lot of troubling issues, especially kind of separating from service, because mentality wise for me, I was thinking more on the end of that full career, that 20 years plus of serving in active duty in the Army. But I had already gone through a lot of challenges on the military side. Like, for example, I ruptured my Achilles tendon while I was actually stationed at Fort Cavazos back in the day a few years ago. And it took ultimately over 3 months for me to get that critical surgery that I needed. And then from there, the rehabilitation throughout service, I tried to kind of fight my way back to kind of be able to do what I needed to do on the active duty side, physically, especially. And then from there, my health, I acquired additional injuries in that time frame. I tried to rehabilitate and get back, and then kind of like still serve in the physical means. But all those injuries gradually got worse over time, and that's where I had to make the decision of I personally need to get out, just for my own physical health, especially. Right now I'm only 30 years old, so I need to think about how these conditions will worsen over time. So that's where I had to make the personal decision for me to separate from service. And then, in a way, that's what drew me to the VA, was because I felt these challenges as a veteran transitioning out of service, and then the struggles of navigating that civilian life, because the military life is very different, in terms of when we work, the workload capacity. There would be times I'd be working to midnight, working on weekends, all salary based, so we're not getting compensated for this additional time frames. A lot of the times the military made me work 24 hours plus. So like we'd stay up full day and then have to come and work the next day and still operate and function through a full day. So there's a lot of those challenges that are very taxing. And by the time you are to separate, you're already burnt out, and needing that additional care to navigate those challenges, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and then kind of going from there.
Earlier on in my career, I worked in the Vermilion County State Attorney's Office, and I specifically focused on domestic violence cases. And what we saw, and research continues to bear this out, is the prevalence of domestic violence within the families of service members. And a lot of that was attributable to PTSD, to just these pressures on people, not making any excuses ever for, inflicting violence on your loved ones, but people basically breaking under the pressures that they're on. I think it's important as we have this conversation, because sometimes people are like, oh, well, people get fired all the time. Why are people getting upset about this? But to understand that in terms of the critical services that are being impacted by these arbitrary firings, the impact it is having and will have for quite some time on our communities, on the United States of America, on our so-called readiness, which is supposedly one of the reasons why this is happening. So there's research that indicates that when they look at post 9/11 veterans, that 30,177 active duty personnel and veterans who served after 9/11 have died by suicide, 30,000 plus, compared to 7,057 service members who were killed in combat during that period, the same period they were examining. In other words, military suicide rates are approximately 4 times higher than combat-related deaths. And so when we talk about the Veteran Affairs, Department of Veteran Affairs, and processing what for some people would be like, oh, they're just processing claims. It's like these are literally life and death issues for the service members. But let's say they don't, quote unquote, die. It's also the quality of life, the stress they're under, the ability to take care of their families financially, but also emotionally. And you talked about even healthcare benefits for their family members. So then it's not just the service member, it's the way this ripple effect and how it affects, it goes beyond that. And when I look at these firings, one of the things that rightfully the government has done, the United States of America government has done, is prioritize hiring veterans for positions. And what I know from so many people who have reached out to me, friends that I have, is that a significant number of the people who are being fired right now with these arbitrary, it's like coming into a house and saying, well, yeah, the house needs to be cleaned. So what we're going to do is we're going to just burn the house down. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. How about we just identify where it needs to be cleaned and take that trash out, as opposed to trashing and burning everything? And that's what this really feels like. And it was intentional, because while many people did not pay attention to Project 2025, and during the presidential election process, Donald Trump was saying, I haven't read it. I don't have anything to do with it. I don't know anything about it. It actually specifically spells out this plan to completely, in their words, clean out the government apparatus. And the way they were going to do it was this whole so-called Schedule F, where the president can come in and through executive orders just fire people, and then eventually, I guess, fill some of those positions that they deem important, whatever that criteria is, because there's no clear criteria of what this means. Fill them with political operatives who will do only what the president says, which is not what a democracy is about, which is not what the United States of America has said it's about. And so many of these people that are being fired, like you said, it's people who are still on probation. Some of them have been on probation, they're like 22 months into it, right? Like in another 2 months, they would have been full out of probation, so on and so forth. And just arbitrarily firing people, not even knowing what are their specific duties, who's going to take over for those duties, how do we keep the government working and serving people, and really impacting not just critical defense issues, but also putting the most vulnerable in our community at high risk. Is there anything that you would like to say or add to that?
Yes. So especially with that probationary period you'd mentioned, there was a lot of cases where a lot of these personnel that were on probationary, they were actually already established federal government employees that have been there for years. But some of them had taken a promotion to another role.
And that put them back into probation. Wow.
Correct. So you lose that technical expertise and that experience that's been there for a while. Like they understand the systems and processes, and then all of a sudden you just yank them out blindsidedly. So that's important to note on that probationary period too.
Wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah, because someone in our office, they got pulled from the director's office. They got cut, and their whole family had moved all the way from Florida to Seattle, specifically for that job. So, like, he had been in the Veterans Health Administration side of things, and then he was jumping over to the Veterans Benefits Administration side to our office in Seattle, all the way from Florida. And then next thing you know, they cut his job, and then he's terminated as well. So there's like the bigger implications of it's not just short-term probationary employees. And like you said, a lot of us are veterans. So essentially our federal service time is much longer than just that temporary period. Like for me, I served 7.4 years in the Army on the active duty side. So my federal time technically would have started in 2017 based off of that calculated time from when I joined the VA. So that's important to note on that sense. And then from the veteran experience as well, like you said, a majority of the workforce in the federal government is in fact veterans themselves. And then a lot of our skills are translatable to the military, to federal government, because the systems and processes, there's parallels to how things are handled, the regulations. Yes, there is a difference in nuances of the language and the acronyms from military to, say, different agency of the federal government, but we have those skills that parallel and directly match to the federal government to enable the systems and processes to work and flow simultaneously. 51% of the Veterans Benefits Administration is actually veterans. So if you think about it from a more customer experience side of things of how we take care of veterans, a lot of us as veterans, we can serve in a capacity that's more empathetic because we live those experiences. We know exactly, or at least to some extent, what that service member transitioning out may be going through. So that's how we can better serve and enhance our customer experiences from our own personal experiences because we have lived through that transition period, most of us, and know the challenges of what that service member is going through. So it's important to note that, especially for veterans that are serving in the VA, because many of us were recently cut. I think the number right now for the VA is up to around 2,500 of us that were cut. And then you also need to think about it from the perspective of a lot of these members that were cut as well. There's the contractor side that was cut too. And a lot of what was cut was also like research-based side of the VHA. So like I know some of the researchers were looking into like prosthetics or opioid addiction. I know that was some of it. And then there's also contracting or members in the offices that served with the Veterans Crisis Line for suicide prevention that were cut as well. So it's important to see it from that framework and lens too.
Just sharing a little bit more information here. This is from the AP News, an article in November 14, 2024, and they said suicides in the U.S. military increased in 2023, continuing a long-term trend. Firearms are the most commonly used method in this incident. The majority of service members who died by suicide were young enlisted men. And obviously that there's a critical need for comprehensive mental health support and effective suicide prevention programs within the military community, obviously what the Veterans Affairs does, and then more specifically what your area was doing in terms of making sure that these claims are properly addressed, taken care of, and people can get their benefits. And so we need to understand on a cellular level what these arbitrary firings are doing. And if we're talking about saving the United States of America money, which is the kind of talking points, when we look at the deficit for this country, these positions and the way they're being cut will not even save the country like a day of what is the increases in our deficit spending. At the same time, letting the wealthiest of Americans off the hook in terms of what they should be paying in taxes like the rest of us pay, and therefore, quote unquote, trying to balance a budget on the backs of our service members and on the backs of the most vulnerable. Some other statistics here in terms of what's happening with veterans also include homelessness. And again, when people don't get the services that they need. This was from January 2024, and they said on a single night in January 2024, 32,882 veterans were experiencing homelessness in the United States. That's the documented ones. That's not the people sleeping on the couches in their mother's home or on a friend in a friend's home or something of that nature. And while those numbers, they say, are coming down, that is one too many. 32,000 of people who pledged allegiance to this country, who've put life and limb at the service of this country, now turning around and not getting the assistance they need. As that article continues to share, they said that while there is a decrease in homelessness in the United States amongst veterans, the reason that number was coming down was because of the targeted efforts by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Veteran Affairs. Meanwhile, in this Project 2025, and the author of Project 2025 is now the one who has been put in charge of the Office of Management and Budget. They are taking a chainsaw, literally, to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Even as they're taking a chainsaw to Medicare and Medicaid, to the Department of Education, to the Department of Veteran Affairs. So people, those of you listening, what do you think will be the long-term implications if the very organizations, the very governmental entities that we're trying to serve, and at this point I'm focusing on our service members, we're trying to serve our service members, are being cut with no focus as to what do they really do, what will be the impact, and who's going to pick up the slack, so to speak. What do you think will be the impact on veterans in your community, their children, and so on and so forth? So it is time to speak up. So let me ask you this now, Raphael. So you get this email, and that's the other thing. I mean, I've worked for different organizations. I'm also a business owner who employs people. You don't just, after eating dinner, say, oh, I'm going to send out an email, you're fired. This is not The Apprentice, right? Okay, this is not a reality show. This is like real life with real life implications. So you guys are getting these after-hour emails, which I have seen some of them. Some of them are absolutely threatening. Like, if you don't resign, if you don't retire, you know, that kind of thing. It's like, wow, is this where we are now? So you get this email. There's no process in place. Hey, person A or person B, we've noticed that you failed to X, Y, and Z. We're going to give you this 90-day period. If this is not up to par, then you're going to... None of that is happening. And like you said, people literally have moved their lives thinking they had a job. And then all of a sudden, it's like, your problem. How have you all responded to this? What is happening on your behalf and on the behalf of other people who are being fired in this way? My understanding is that we may be at about 200,000 people across the federal government, the agencies that have received this kind of treatment. So what is happening behind the scenes that people may not be aware of?
Oh, for sure. So from an experience of the termination side, so from my own personal experience, got that email, and then that Friday, the 14th of February, I had essential tasks I needed to take care of. So best believe, saw that email, I was like, enough with this email. I got to work. There's essential tasks I need to take care of for the day. So I just started working. I didn't even care about the email. And then all of a sudden that Friday, while I'm working on some essential tasks, like, for example, 2 congressional inquiries coming from DC for 2 specific veteran cases, my account was terminated and disabled, cut off, and I couldn't even get in my computer after that. So that was a struggle on that end. But essentially what I did was I drafted up email specifically to the offices of personnel management on the federal government side. And then I also even tied in the VA leadership, senior leadership, to include like Honorable Collins, our Secretary of the VA, on that email. And then I looked into federal regulations and kind of looked at the 3 specific federal regulations that they mentioned on the termination. And I try to find the gaps of how this could be considered a wrongful termination. From there, I wrote 3 letters to Congress, one to Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland for the 10th District in Washington State, and then my 2 senators, so Senator Patty Murray and then Senator Maria Cantwell. So I worked it through legislative side of communications through Congress, and then the legal side, I put in an electronic appeal with the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board. And then I also communicated with the firm in DC that's working a group class action appeal on that side. So there's also, I want to mention, a nonprofit of a bunch of legal personnel in, I believe they're centralized in DC, but I could be wrong. But they're called Democracy Forward. They're the ones really tackling all these executive orders coming through, everything being pushed, and then looking at the legal frameworks of, is this legal or not? How can we challenge this legally to look at the full scope of it? Because there needs to be that checks and balances to everything going on. So that's that aspect of it, of how we're really fighting. And then I know I'd recently saw in the media, there was 6 individual cases that actually won in terms of them, these termination appeals coming through. And then on top of that, there was a federal judge that called these probationary terminations as illegal and unjust. That was a judge, I believe, in San Francisco just recently.
Yes. Yes.
So we're kind of navigating what's going to be the next steps forward, because with legal systems and processes, sometimes a lot of these cases could take, who knows, like especially group ones, they could take a year plus. We really don't know, but at least we wanted to initiate on that side of challenging these legally. So we're really relying on the judicial system to come through and see these, validate our concerns, our cases, and then kind of going forward from there. And then with that being said, from my perspective too, my leadership, they're constantly reaching out to me, and they haven't gotten any updates whatsoever, because a lot of us were receiving these updates on a case by case, or it's coming last minute. So we're playing things by the hour, by the day,
because it's just chaos. It's just absolute chaos.
We're playing a game of reactionary ping pong right now, and it's usually things, the way it's supposed to go is everything stems down from DC, and then it's a flow. For us, it would go there all the way through to the Pacific District, which is headquartered in Arizona. And then from the Pacific District to our Seattle regional office, from the director's office down to our division at the Disability Rating Activity Site. And then we'd adjust from there and respond up accordingly up the chain. So, but everything we're getting is just last minute. Sometimes our division will directly get something, say from the Office of Personnel Management, which is the senior HR for the federal government. And it'll be so last minute that we're just reacting because there's no guidance from our hires on how to handle this, because they weren't even tracking this in the first place.
Yeah. So who's doing the work now?
So one of my poor coworkers, he's our training manager for our division. He wasn't really set up to handle a lot of what's going on. There's a lot of things I know he doesn't know how to handle, because he's texting me here and there of, hey, how do I do this question? And I'm all willing to help him because I know he's drowning. But the thing with him too is they fired our director's office, our regional office is training manager. So he's helping to cover down for the director's office as well. So he's balancing these multiple jobs. And then my supervisor is going to have to take on additional tasks. A lot of our managers and our coaches who are supposed to be managing the teams directly handling the claims, they're having to split the load. A lot of them are already working extra hours. So that's something to consider too.
So the service members are just going to be on hold.
Oh, for sure. Like there's definitely going to be a lot more delays, especially on the inquiry side, because I was the one answering the inquiries from all the different military bases through their public contact teams, their military service coordinators, who directly are the face-to-face with the veterans. I was the one responding to inquiries. In a lot of these cases, we brought up the topic of homelessness earlier. There'd be cases where we'd get an expedite request from these public contact teams from a base saying, hey, this veteran or this transitioning service member is on the risk of homelessness, or something in that case. From there, what happens is that automatically puts a flag. I see that, and then I directly look to see the chain that claim is being worked on, and then I directly contact that coach and that team that has that claim in their queue right now. Or if it's not in a queue, I contact one of the coaches or teams saying, we need to expedite this. This is an expedite case. And then that's one of the claims that would get put to the front to be worked, versus our already balanced queue, because I was the one pulling the workload reports into kind of how to categorize how many days in queue these specific claims have been. But then there's those case-by-case scenarios that each of the bases would tell us, hey, we need an expedite request. I was the one kind of coordinating how those got expedited as well.
Wow. So when you guys got these letters and you're locked out of your accounts and so on and so forth, are you still getting paid? Are you filing for unemployment? Like, what's the next? What do you do? Because
Yes.
I know that if all of a sudden my husband and I get an email and it's like, yeah, your job is gone, I mean, there will be some serious financial stress.
Oh, for sure.
Just like in, okay, how do we manage things and how do we move forward? So, what has been communicated to you all? What is going on?
So it was kind of wild because, like I said, my account got canceled that Friday, disabled and everything, couldn't get in. I actually got a call on President's Day that Monday saying that while my appeal was being reviewed, I could still work. So next thing Tuesday, I show up in office to kind of work. Still can't get into anything. We're requesting stuff to get my account back. And then it turned into that full day of me standing over my coworker, the training manager, his shoulder, telling him, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do this. It's pointing on the screen. I'm like, these are things that need to be handled, working off his account. But then what's wild is that next day, I'm still trying to pen them reestablishing my account and all this stuff. New guidance is I can't work while my appeal is being reconsidered. So I'm just like, what the heck is going on?
What is going on?
They're drowning in work already. So I can't work while this is being handled. And then with the status of what I'm pending, there's really no true answers.
So are they paying the workers while their appeals are pending?
Yes. So I initially was put on said paid administrative leave, but I haven't really seen what that really means, because I looked recently at like my bank account, and in terms of what was processed recently, the amount of salary I was supposed to get was a lot smaller. So I'm wondering what
that is insane. How do people live? How do you budget? So you've arbitrarily fired people. You have no plan in place. People are on administrative leave while they appeal. I'm wondering what happens to the people who didn't even know what process to use to appeal. Sure. But then where the government is supposed to be saving money by firing people in this way, but then you're paying people to be on administrative leave, but then you're not paying them what they use. This is actually the very important, well, all of it has been very important, but this does not sound like a sound government. This is not how the United States of America, that we like to proclaim is the #1 democracy in the world and the best and most exceptional country in the world. This is not how our federal government should be running, with all the implications for everyone. I know you have to be careful what you say. So who are some of the outlets that have reached out to you, who have given you an opportunity to share this story? And two-part question. Second part is, for those listening who are being impacted, what advice, if any, would you give to them?
Yes. So those that kind of reached out and kind of advocated on my behalf, and we've collectively worked through things, is the importance was first establishing that transparency and the facts of the reality of what's actually going on, just from my personal experience, because there's thousands more just like me. We need to establish the face and reality of these individual cases, of these thousands of personnel that were just terminated. So DC Report, which is a nonprofit media site in DC, they're the ones that actually first reached out to me, kind of drafted an article on my case in my story. I just shared the facts. And then from there, it trickled down into like NPR reaching out, Associated Press, Business Insider, Fierce Healthcare, NBC, a local station here in Seattle, Cairo 7 News. And then from there, too, on the legislative side, our Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, Senator Patty Murray, they reached out to me directly. And then Senator Patty Murray had me go on a news press media conference call with the media to address these concerns from a huge scope of the federal government, of all the types of employees that are being terminated. And then from there, too, I had Office of Senator Tammy Duckworth in Illinois reach out to me, and then the Office of Senator Bernie Sanders reach out to me as well to kind of further address these concerns from the legislative side. So
any of our Republican senators or congressmen or women?
No.
Okay.
Didn't get any really feedback from there. I know I did get a call from a media site that tends to be more on the conservative side, which was Dr. Phil's News Network. They reached out to at least have me on air for a short time just to kind of tell a little bit of my story. So at least there was, in that aspect of getting facts out, there was that side of it. So, but no one on the Republican side has actually reached out in terms of my case.
Okay. So what advice would you give to other people who are experiencing this right now?
Yes. My advice would be to first look at this from a legislative side. So if you haven't already reached out to your Congress member within your district, you could even just a quick Google search of contact my Congress member or contact my senator, and then it will directly have you input that first link you click on, have you directly input your zip code. You'll find exactly who your Congress member is or your senator is, and you can shoot them to direct email. And then from there, their offices will process it and eventually get back to you. That's on the legislative side. So because our Congress needs to understand these implications, because that paints the picture on enabling this checks and balance systems from the executive side. There's that balance on the legislative side. And then from a legal framework on the judicial side for the checks and balances, you can, I believe it's a 30-day window from when you're terminated. You can appeal with the U.S. Merit Systems Board. If you just type that up and U.S. Merit Systems Board appeal, there's an electronic appeal you could go through. And then I will note there are a lot of firms that are handling group action appeals as well. You can also go through that realm too and share your story. But the big importance outside of just the legislative and the judicial side of things is just to share your story in the first place, because a lot of people don't actually may not actually know what you do and how it impacts the general population. And it's important while we're going through all of this to truly share what our actions and what we actually do, and actually how it impacts the greater population, because I think that transparency and that empathetic understanding builds a stronger case for what's actually going on and how it's going to impact us down the road.
Thank you for sharing that. For those of you who are listening, please go to our YouTube channel, Rethinking Freedom, because what we're going to do is put some links that the links that Raphael Garcia has just shared. We're going to put that in the description. That way you can just go there and click and follow through. As we talk about rethinking freedom here, there's a tendency for us sometimes to feel things would just take care of themselves. But I think that that's really ahistorical. even the very founding of the United States of America, right? Started with the revolution, started with people coming together and saying, we can start before then, people who came together and killed off Native Americans and took this land. That's one part of it. But then there's the other part of it of saying we don't want to be under the authority of a king and we want to have autonomy. And it wasn't just sitting and writing letters, it was taking action, although writing letters is an important part of action as well. And being willing to fight for that freedom. And so even if you're watching or listening to this right now and you're saying, well, I don't know anybody this is impacting, which is not true. But even if that's what you're saying, I want you to understand that when we have a system of checks and balances that you said, like you stated, our judicial, our legislative, and the executive branch, and all of those are kind of folding. What you then have, if you're not paying attention and if you don't fight back, is that same authoritarian kind of government, that dictatorship that Americans claim that they were getting away from when they broke away from England to begin with. And so all of us should be speaking up right now. I don't care what your political affiliation is. I'm actually an independent, but pay attention to who is speaking up, who is fighting for us as a people, who is saying, wait a second, we have 3 different branches of government and each of them should be standing alone and fighting and not just falling to the dictatorships of, quite frankly, Donald Trump and Elon Musk at this time. This is a man, when we talk about the Department of Governmental Efficiency, you cannot run a government like a business because businesses often don't care about how people are doing. Businesses are not in the market for taking care of their citizens. They're just about profit, the bottom line. That's all that matters. You cannot have a government that works that way, because then why would you bother educating your kids? Why would you bother having a healthcare system? Why would you bother ensuring that your veterans, your service members are taken care of? Why would you care about your old and your elderly and your sick? With businesses, you just throw them out. Our government cannot run that way. And if you think this is not going to come for you, it will, which is why all of us need to be fighting back right now. So whether this is something that you feel is directly impacting you or not, the trickle-down effect is it will impact our communities, which will impact you as well. It's going to impact our tax base. It's going to impact, it's already impacting how our allies across the world see us, because right now they understand that the US government cannot be depended on because it is chaos at this point. So please speak up. Please share encouragement for Raphael Garcia and the hundreds of thousands who are experiencing this right now. And understand that when we talk about freedom, it really takes all of us being involved. Raphael, are there any last comments that you would like to make?
Last comments. I would just personally just also on top of that, just check in with people, make sure they're okay, because just talk with your neighbors, just from a personal standpoint, just mentally check in on them, because a lot of people are going through a lot with everything going on, so many changes. You don't know how it's going to impact them. So approach everything moving forward just through an empathetic lens. Try to put yourself in the shoes of others, even if you would disagree with certain people out there. Really gravitate towards that empathy and try to see where they're coming from, because a lot of us we're hurting, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally. So
and financially.
Yes. Be respectful and understanding from that sense too. Yeah, that's really all I'd have to say. Outside of that, hopefully, there's also elections coming up.
Yes.
For a lot of positions nationwide. So it's important to see where that person being put for reelection, where they voted across the board, because if you don't like where they voted, you have in that district, or say you have the power to vote for the other candidate because you don't like the way this candidate's voting. So there's that way to fight back as well.
Very important. Thank you again for your courage. I'm so sorry that you've been put in this position because I know you were just trying to live your life like the rest of us. Go in, do a great job. You're 30 years old, should have your whole life ahead of you and just planning for what that future looks like. You didn't ask for this, but thank you for your courage. Thank you for your willingness to speak up because many people are afraid right now and are not speaking up. But you know what? The only way evil wins is when good people are silent. So thank you so much for your courage and thank you for joining us today on Rethinking Freedom.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Thanks.